H.A.C.K. Chapter 891, The Thoughts of All Parties. The conference hall of the music clan was originally used by the 12 holy daughters for secret meetings while the guests were received in another side chamber. But ancient god Lakshmi was injured, and only Brunhilde remained, but she was unable to intimidate the 5 ancient gods. Because of that, the envoys of the 5 ancient gods decided to take advantage of their strength and bully the weak. They insisted on using that hall to enjoy the music of beauties. In consideration of the general situation, holy daughter H.A.C.K, who was responsible for entertaining the guests, could only let them use the hall. At that moment, the 5 envoys were sitting on the stage while a group of beautiful women from the music clan were sitting underneath and playing instruments. The main seat was occupied by the supposed leader Jiutian, the son of Garuda. He had a tall and straight figure, a handsome appearance, and a head full of blonde hair. If one only looked at his upper half, he could charm countless women, but if someone was to look at his lower half, they wouldn't see ordinary human legs but a pair of clawed bird feet. Jiutian's golden eyes swept past the bodies of the women sitting underneath, but his expression was slightly gloomy. As a son of an ancient god, he was called an ancestor in Garuda clan, so he had seen countless amazing beauties. Although the women of the music clan were beautiful, they didn't reach the stage of stunning in his eyes. Yet according to the legends passed down among the people of Lanlu, the women of Deva clan of Azura city and the 12 music clans of Lakshmi city were world-shaking beauties. But right then, it seemed like the Deva clan was slightly higher than the music clans. All of them only have ordinary physical bodies. They aren't anything interesting. Jiutian was distracted while he waved his hand to indicate for the music clan's women to put down their musical instruments. The women sitting underneath placed down their instruments with confused faces. Right then, only a bunch of initial stage sage flux experts were in the hall, since holy daughter H.A.C.K had gone to Pipa clan's main hall. What should they do then? Should they remain seated still? Jiutian turned around to look at Pai Zhan, whose body was constantly transforming, and asked, "How long has this holy daughter H.A.C.K been gone for?" "It has been quite some time. She is probably busy persuading that newly advanced ancient goddess." A smile was at the corners of Pai Zhan's face. With his constantly transforming body, his smile seemed to be filled with part coldness, part ridicule, and part disdain. The ancestor of Indra clan, Difan, sitting beside Pai Zhan, coldly snorted, and a few electric sparks were emitted from the lightning imprint between his eyebrows. He disdainfully said, "Ancient god Lakshmi was injured by Azura, so the strength of Lakshmi city has reached rock bottom," he said disdainfully. "They need the protection of our godfathers, and this newly advanced ancient goddess is still trying to put on airs? Isn't she afraid that we will fling our sleeves and leave? But she can act like this. After all, she is an ancient goddess. It is a position equivalent to that of our godfathers. Although we are ancestors, we are only gods." Yet Yen, the ancestor of Yaksha clan, with deep blue skin and a pair of sharp fangs, subconsciously replied. His moon-like dazzling eyes were constantly drifting around, which made it difficult to read his thoughts. Yet Yen's words caused the expressions of the other 4 envoys in the hall to turn gloomy. As long as one had sufficient strength, they could possess corresponding strength in all of Lanlu. The ancient god realm was just one step ahead of the god realm. The elders and clan patriarchs of the 7 clans of the 7 ancient gods in Lanlu were all gods. Only after rising to the level of ancient gods would they attain the position of godfathers, and the treatment they received would become completely different. But that was only under ordinary circumstances. The 7 ancient gods were suspicious of each other but still maintained a subtle equilibrium. Right then, however, Lakshmi city was vulnerable. Its ancient goddess was heavily injured by Azura and possessed only 5% of her original strength. Azura's strength was deep and unmeasurable, and he was able to preserve his complete strength during the last battle. He did not receive any injuries. When the 5 ancient gods descended on Azura city, they clearly sensed it. They weren't completely sure of everything, but they returned directly to the divine palace to use the heavenly grand ritual to recover their injuries. The 5 ancient gods wanted to use the opportunity of the ancient goddess being injured to swallow Lakshmi city. Fortunately, a previous holy daughter of Lakshmi city had already reached ancient god realm. When the 5 ancient gods saw Lu Qing's breathtaking beauty, all their thoughts of swallowing Lakshmi city disappeared. They were even ready to ally with Lakshmi city for the breathtaking beauty of Lu Qing. The present Lakshmi city is extremely vulnerable and has incurred the hatred of Asura. The subtle balance between the 7 ancient gods has been destroyed long ago, and the battle of gods is imminent. If ancient god Lakshmi doesn't ally with our godfathers, she'll be the first one to fall, Jiutian Kuang said indifferently. I want to see how much of a breathtaking beauty is this Lu Qing that even our godfathers were charmed. The other 4 envoys also revealed smiles, but they didn't say anything. The aim behind the arrival of 5 of them was to see Lu Qing. If they did not get to see her, there was no meaning in them coming in advance. Lu Qing was an ancient goddess, so her position was naturally respectable, even in the eyes of the 5 ancient gods. The envoys might be the sons of ancient gods, but they could not ask Lu Qing to come out with their own mouths. Jiutian Kuang, however, could do it. Garuda possessed tyrannical strength among the 5 ancient gods, so even his sons felt a sense of superiority before the others. Jiutian Kuang was someone who dared to speak their intentions. When the envoys of the other 4 clans instigated him, he directly asked Holy Daughter Hu-Shi to bring Lu Qing out for him to see her. Truly brazen. When the women of the music clan sitting underneath heard the arrogant words of the 5 envoys which were filled with contempt toward Lakshmi city, their hearts filled with resentment. An unpleasant look entered their eyes. Those music clan's women felt that their strength was insufficient. If they had gods or even half-gods, they might have jointly attacked the 5 envoys. Yet Yen, who was sitting on the stage, looked at the music clan's women and said with excitement, "You bunch of music clan's descendants are really interesting. You look like you want to eat us with your gazes." When he said that, Jiutian Kuang, who was feeling slightly neglected, turned to look at the women of the music clan, and a cold light flashed past his golden eyes. These trash with ordinary bodies dared to look at him with such gazes? Jiutian Kuang coldly snorted, and a divine presence erupted from his body. It was followed by a golden light that leaped out from his body and wantonly jumped around the hall. One after another, threads of divine energy mixed with wind energy rushed toward the women of the music clan. They clenched their teeth and tried to play their musical instruments with difficulty. But when the wind energy attacked, all of them were blown away and knocked against the wooden gate. When they fell down and spat out a mouthful of blood, they raised their heads and looked at the golden light flying around in alarm. They were only initial stage sage flux experts, so compared to Jiutian Kuang, who was the son of an ancient god, the difference between them was like that between heaven and earth. Once the golden light containing divine power appeared, none of them could stop it. The 4 envoys sitting next to Jiutian Kuang smiled without any intention of stopping him. They didn't care in the slightest about whether the group of the music clan's women sitting underneath died or not. The only thing they cared about was the reaction of the holy daughters after they learned of this matter. Chapter 892, It is not the time. The golden light containing divine power turned into golden blades, which thickly dotted the roof of the hall. While trembling, they turned into a blur and rushed toward the music clan's women who were still lying on the ground. Fear appeared in their eyes, but none of them dodged. First, because even if they dodged, they would still die. Without a holy daughter present, they wouldn't be able to stop the unexpected calamity. Second, Jiutian Kuang was punishing them for disrespect, but they would still do it if given another chance. There were other considerations in their minds as well. Even if Lakshmi city was vulnerable, they wouldn't permit others to disrespect it or the music clans. It didn't matter whether the other party was the heir of an ancient god or not. When the golden blades dropped, they were frozen in the air using a formless energy. From when are the others permitted to meddle when the descendants of the music clan commit mistakes? A cold feminine voice asked. It echoed through the whole hall. The woman's voice was deep and relaxing. When Jiutian-kuang, who was about to angrily demand an explanation, lost all his anger upon hearing it. There was only one thought in his mind, and it was to see the owner of that voice. The 4 envoys sitting by his side also had the same thought. They were certain that the owner of the voice was certainly a beauty which could ruin a country. Everyone looked outside the hall and saw an unusually tall woman coming over. She had long and gentle hair which was bound with a golden ring on her back. Her skin was fair, but there was a hint of anger in her phoenix-like eyes. Strangely though, it made her look fresh and charming. Like a witch or an immortal, she was a heaven-shaking beauty. When the girls of the music clan who were unable to get up from the ground saw the golden blades frozen in the sky, they turned toward Brunhilde and paid their respects. Paying respects to the ancient goddess. All of you stand up. For provoking the 5 envoys, you won't receive a meal tonight. Now go to the medicine hall and get yourself treated, Brunhilde said with a wave of her hand. From the moment she entered the scene, the 5 envoys weren't able to take their eyes off her. Even when they heard her punishment for the girls of the music clan, they didn't pay the slightest attention. If it had happened before, there would be no need to speak of Jiutian-kuang, even the other 4 envoys would have demanded a heavy punishment for the women of the music clan. But right then, the 5 of them were completely enchanted and did not have the mind to consider other things. Jiutian-kuang's claws hidden under the table tightly clutched at the golden threads of the carpet. His expression was full of surprise. A chair appeared in Brunhilde's hand out of nowhere, and she sat down on it. She calmly looked at the distracted envoys and slowly said, "Do the 5 envoys want something from this ancient goddess?" Li Yunmu and holy daughter H.A.C.K stood behind her and looked at the 5 envoys with unkind thoughts in their heads. When they had come over just a moment ago, the 3 of them had investigated everything happening in the hall. If they hadn't rushed over in time, the leader, Jiutian-kuang, would have really cut apart the weak women sent to entertain him. They were in the residence of the music clans, Lakshmi City. If someone dared to be so arrogant and unbridled in their territory, who wouldn't be angry? But Lakshmi City wanted to ally with the 5 ancient gods, so attacking their sons dispatched as envoys wouldn't do anything good. Holy daughter H.A.C.K sighed to conceal the killing intent in her eyes. Li Yunmu was standing next to her with crossed arms. Just a moment ago, the 5 envoys had angered him somewhat by bullying the weak, but now the time of them were staring wide-eyed at Brunhilde, which made him feel violated. Before I came, Godfather told me that Lakshmi City had one more ancient goddess who is a heaven-shaking beauty. I didn't believe him and came to Lakshmi City in advance. I hadn't expected to see that you, ancient goddess Lu Qing, are just like what Godfather told me. One glance is sufficient to make anyone fall for a lifetime. When Jiutian-kuang heard Brunhilde's voice, he was intoxicated. After a while, he slowly returned to reality, relaxed his claws, and a hint of smile appeared on his face. Just like Godfather said, one glance could make anyone fall in love for a lifetime. Ancient goddess Lu Qing is even one level higher than those of Deva clan from Azura City. Pai Zhan, with his transforming body, also returned to reality and said emotionally, Godfather really has a good eye. The woman he cares about is really different from everyone else. There will always be beauties who will be different from others. The 5 envoys continued one after another. Their words, apart from singing praise for Brunhilde, were also filled with the feeling of appreciating objects. Brunhilde looked at the 5 envoys and said in a calm voice, "The 5 envoys really praise me too highly. But this goddess doesn't understand one thing, do the sons of other ancient gods don't have any understanding of social structure? I am an ancient goddess, while you are only gods. According to the rules, when you all see me, you should pay your greetings to show your respect. But you all still haven't moved from your positions, so what's the meaning of this? Could it be that the gods of present no longer even have the understanding of the most basic regulations?" When she said that, smiles appeared on the faces of all the envoys. In their eyes, even Brunhilde's cold words were like sweet talk. But despite being fond of her, they didn't let go of their arrogance. Lakshmi city was vulnerable and could only rely on an alliance with the 5 ancient gods. Although they used the word alliance, the 5 envoys were clear in their heart that they would be establishing a subsidiary relationship. Lakshmi city would turn into a subordinate city for the 5 ancient gods. It might nominally remain under the control of ancient goddess Lakshmi, but secretly it would be controlled by the 5 ancient gods. Even the newly advanced ancient goddess had already been turned into a bargaining chip, so what social structure was she talking about? Ancient goddess Lu Qing must be joking. The condition for the alliance between the 5 ancient gods and ancient goddess Lakshmi is you. After the competition, you will eventually become our godmother, so in order to get intimate, we didn't pay our respects, Ye Tian, who had deep blue skin, said. Brunhilde did not reply, but examined the 5 envoys. Li Yunmu, who was standing behind her, walked to the front at that moment. Competition hasn't even begun and you 5 envoys dare to be so certain of our victory, he said coldly. If the 5 ancient gods can win against my ancestor, then this time's disrespect could be considered as forgotten. But if none of the 5 ancient gods win, then you 5 will die. When Jiutian Kuang heard Li Yunmu being so unbridled, he frowned and turned his gaze towards the source of voice to see another beauty. Although she couldn't be considered to be heaven-shaking like ancient goddess Lu Qing, she was still extremely beautiful. Moreover, the more one looked at her, the more beautiful she appeared. The unhappiness in his heart quickly dissipated and he softly said to Li Yunmu, "Where do you come from, little sister?" When Li Yunmu looked at Jiutian Kuang, a hint of displeasure appeared on his face. He was impersonating Lu Bailing at that moment, but when he saw the naked lust in Jiutian Kuang's eyes, he still felt nauseous in his heart. "I am the holy daughter of Pipa clan, and my position is completely different from yours. What, do you think that you can suppress me by using the position of an ancient god's son?" Li Yunmu pushed down the nausea in his heart and took 3 deep breaths before relaxing his hands which had balled into fists. Chapter 893, Want to make me a concubine? When being so vigilant, Li Yunmu gave an exquisite smile, but his eyebrows creased slightly. Jiutian Kuang looked him in the eyes and became even more fond of him. "Since you are a holy daughter of Lakshmi city, I naturally cannot suppress you. Even if I could, this wouldn't be the time." Li Yunmu might have possessed formidable strength, but he still retreated a few steps in fear. When Brunhilde sitting on her chair heard the conversation between Jiutian Kuang and Li Yunmu, a smile appeared at the corners of her lips. It seemed like Jiutian Kuang had fallen for Lu Bailing, or should it be said for Yunmu. When Brunhilde thought of it, she couldn't stop her smile. Hu Shi, standing behind her, saw Jiutian Kuang's warm gaze, and her expression became strange. She had been married for a long time, so she could naturally see the feelings between men and women. However, it was Lord who was impersonating holy daughter Lu Bailing. When Hu Shi realized that, she felt her blood run cold. Humph, elder brother Tian Kuang really can intimidate people. A few words were enough to scare the holy daughter into retreating several steps. "This holy daughter, what are you known as?" "My godfather is Vishnu, and I am the 3rd son Pai Zhan." Pai Zhan's body stabilized and didn't continue transforming any longer when he looked at Li Yunmu with his eyes shining. "My godfather is Yaksha, and I am the 4th son Ye Tian. My godfather is Indra, and I am the 2nd son Di Fan." When the holy daughter got so scared that she retreated a few words from Jiutian Kuang, Pai Zhan introduced himself. The other 3 envoys also introduced themselves one by one. When the 4 of them looked at Li Yunmu, a strong desire to possess him appeared in their hearts. After all, regardless of how much of a heaven-startling beauty Brunhilde was, she was still someone that belonged to their godfathers. The 4 of them had no way to dip a finger in that pie. But the holy daughter before them was different. She was only a holy daughter of Lakshmi city. After the alliance, Lakshmi city will become a subsidiary city of the 5 clans, so obtaining a clan's holy daughter wouldn't be difficult. Moreover, with their status of the sons of ancient gods, a holy daughter was perfectly compatible with them, and all 5 of them thought that way. Brunhilde's smile became increasingly brighter. It was the first time she had encountered such an amusing matter. Although the 5 envoys were ganging up on her husband, she found it quite funny. Her continuous smile made holy daughter H.A.C.K standing behind her to also curl her lips upwards to form a slight smile without making any sound. "Do the 5 of you want to catch me?" Li Yunmu smiled instead of being angry while looking at the passionate gazes of the 5 gods. Jiutian Kuang was slightly startled and suspiciously asked, "Holy daughter, what do you mean by saying catching you? Catching me means that you all want to take me your wife." A smile was at the corners of Li Yunmu's lips, but killing intent was rising in his heart. Take him as wife. When the envoys of 5 clans heard his words, they were slightly startled. Yet Yen and Fan De laughed a few times, but didn't reply. Pai Zhan lowered his head and shook it, without saying anything. Shiva clan's envoy, who had been sitting with his eyes closed, opened his eyes, revealing a pair of crescent moons in them, and curiously looked at Li Yunmu. After a moment of silence, Jiutian Kuang looked at the 4 envoys before turning to Li Yunmu and said, "It could be assumed that Holy Daughter has misunderstood something. As the son of an ancient god existing from ancient times, I already have a wife. But seeing your youthful beauty, I want to let you become my concubine." When he threw those words out, the smile on Holy Daughter H.A.C.K's face froze. The smile on the face of Brunhilde sitting on the chair also disappeared, and she expressionlessly looked at the 5 envoys. Neither of them had thought that the 5 envoys would speak such words. The 5 didn't know that Li Yunmu was disguising himself as Holy Daughter Lu Bailing, but speaking such frivolous words was already wrong. However, Jiutian Kuang was saying things like letting him become his concubine. A true holy daughter wouldn't be able to maintain her good temperament after hearing such words, let alone an ancient god-level expert like Li Yunmu. The trouble right then was too large. Li Yunmu, standing in front, didn't make a sound. Holy daughter H.A.C.K was afraid that some accident might happen, so she wondered if she should call the other holy daughters. At that moment though, Brunhilde saw threads of demonic energy coming out of Li Yunmu. Her gaze focused, and she said, "You go and close the door." Holy daughter H.A.C.K glanced at Li Yunmu, then turned around to close the door. Jiutian Kuang, who was sitting on the stage, saw the silent Li Yunmu and explained with a smile, "Actually, the difference between wife and concubine is only that of status. With your extremely beautiful appearance, if you followed me back to my clan, you would definitely become my favored concubine. At that time, your position and status wouldn't be lacking compared to that of the principal wife." When the 4 envoys heard his words, a hint of contempt appeared in their eyes. Unless the holy daughter was a 3-year-old child, how could she not know that a concubine was inferior to wife? Regardless of how much the husband doted upon her, she would remain a concubine with a lower position. Moreover, the position of a holy daughter in Lakshmi city and that of an ancient god's son was equal. If she really became a concubine, it would be like a slap to Lakshmi city's face. The holy daughter had also previously addressed Lu Qing as ancestor, so she was probably the heir of an ancient god. Jiutian Kuang said his speech in the presence of ancient goddess Lu Qing, which was tantamount to saying that he didn't place her in his eyes. In addition to that, with his status of a god, he had previously requested holy daughter H.A.C.K to invite ancient goddess Lu Qing to meet with them. After being disrespected 2 times, it could be assumed that ancient goddess Lu Qing's heart would be filled with fury. When the 5 envoys had left, their godfathers had repeatedly urged them to act properly in Lakshmi city and treat ancient goddess Lu Qing respectfully. But ever since they arrived, the 4 envoys had been instigating the arrogant Jiutian Kuang to do such things. When they saw him being interested in the holy daughter, the 4 chose to act as one and make sure he kept on acting out. It was all in order to make ancient goddess Lu Qing hate Jiutian Kuang and even Garuda. Jiutian Kuang saw that Li Yunmu was still not talking, and his expression turned dark. Holy daughter needn't hesitate. You should be clear about the crisis Lakshmi city is facing right now. My godfather Garuda is the leader of the 5 ancient gods, and your choice will also be related to whether Lakshmi city is successful in forming an alliance with the 5 gods. The fate of many people depends on your choice. After saying this, Jiu Tiankuang waited for Li Yunmu to make a choice. He believed that after he said so much, the holy daughter would understand what to do. At that moment, he only needed to wait for the holy daughter to agree. After a long time, Li Yunmu, who was standing before the stage, raised his head and looked at the leader Jiu Tiankuang and said with a sneer, "Done talking? If you are done talking, then I will speak. The alliance between the 5 ancient gods and Lakshmi city is in order to jointly deal with Asura and not to turn Lakshmi city into your subordinate state. Don't try to take the attitude of a superior. Moreover, ancient goddess Lu Qing is the ancient goddess of Lakshmi city, and her position is equal to that of the 5 ancient gods. The disrespect all of you show is a great offense. This is the first thing." While saying that, Li Yunmu transformed into a blur and rushed toward Jiu Tiankuang, who was acting as the leader. The next instant, he appeared in front of Jiu Tiankuang and unleashed a punch filled with divine power. Jiu Tiankuang, who was still sitting on his seat, saw the punch in front of him, and a smile appeared on his face. When the punch touched him, he turned into an afterimage. Chapter 894, I will punch your Birdhead. Why is a holy daughter being so violent? You should accept the truth. The only path of survival in front of Lakshmi city is to ally with the 5 ancient gods and become a subordinate state. Although the word subordinate state sounds a little unpleasant, actually being under the 5 ancient gods isn't so bad. I, as the son of an ancient god, will take you as a concubine and rescue you from this abyss of suffering. Jiu Tiankuang's voice came from the other end of the hall. At some point in time, only an afterimage was left behind on the seat. The main body was looking down from the sky. Li Yunmu pulled his fist back. He turned around to look at the smiling Jiu Tiankuang and said, "I was actually giving you face. Even if Lakshmi city falls in battle, we wouldn't become slaves of the 5 ancient gods. You are thinking too much." Additionally, after saying until there, Li Yunmu disappeared from in front of the main seat. The expressions of the envoy sitting motionlessly until that moment froze after seeing her movement. A doubt took root in everyone's heart at that moment. The music clans of Lakshmi city walked the path of sound laws, so when did a holy daughter with such a fast speed appear? When Jiu Tiankuang saw that Li Yunmu's figure was an afterimage similar to his, he became vigilant in his heart and turned his attention to the energy fluctuations in the surroundings. As someone who stood at the pinnacle of the god realm, he naturally wouldn't place an initial stage god like the holy daughter in his eyes. But if he was beaten by a sneak attack, he would turn into an enormous joke. You think your speed is fast, eh? Li Yunmu did not finish speaking before he suddenly appeared behind Jiu Tiankuang and attacked with a punch bubbling with divine energy. Before Jiu Tiankuang could respond, the punch struck his back, and waves of divine energy entered his body. They were mixed in with a hint of black power. The attack sent Jiu Tiankuang flying, and he crashed into the ground, below the steps of the stage. You little girl are being too impudent. I will have to teach you a lesson." Jiu Tiankuang sensed a burst of pain coming from his back. The divine power which was injected in his body began to wantonly roam around in his body, and his expression tightened. No one had dared to act toward him like that before. Among the 5 envoys that came, his strength was the highest. Just a moment ago, if he hadn't thought of showing leniency and became somewhat absent-minded, how could the little girl appear behind him without him detecting her? Jiu Tiankuang used the divine energy in his body to purge the enemy's divine energy which was wantonly running around in his body, but he lost his focus the next moment and was surprisingly unable to control the divine energy in his body. Even after trying again, the situation did not change. Jiu Tiankuang raised his head and looked at Li Yunmu in the sky. "You little girl, what exactly did you do?" he demanded in an ice-cold voice. What? I just sealed your cultivation. Aren't you very good at running? Now continue doing that. Li Yunmu said with a sneer. When he thought of Jia Tianquang's careless actions as well as his words from just a moment ago, he felt a wave of nauseousness in his heart. He moved and arrived in front of the panicking Jia Tianquang, then he just let his punches loose without any pattern. Without cultivation, Jia Tianquang was a completely ordinary person with the exception of a divine body and a formidable regenerative ability. While being hit by countless punches, Jia Tianquang was sent flying again and again. That envoys behind him also used divine power to intentionally push him in front of Li Yunmu. When the four envoys saw the battered and exhausted Jia Tianquang, sneers appeared on their faces. The four of them were really delighted by seeing the usually arrogant Jia Tianquang in dire straits. You aren't a holy daughter from Lakshmi City. Lakshmi City's holy daughters only walk the path of sound laws and never step on the path of close-quarter combat. Who exactly are you? Jia Tianquang looked at Li Yunmu while wildly spitting out blood with dread in his eyes. How could a holy daughter of Lakshmi City walk the path of close-quarter combat? Garuda was the fastest among the 7 ancient gods, so being his son, Jia Tianquang had also inherited this innate skill, so his speed was the highest among the envoys. But even if the fact that a holy daughter of Lakshmi City wasn't cultivating sound laws, but rather walking the path of close quarters combat was forgotten, her speed surpassed that of Jia Tianquang, who had an innate gift in terms of speed. How could this make any sense? When he spoke, the entire main hall went completely silent. The four envoys looked at Jia Tianquang, whose whole body was covered in blood, as if they were looking at an idiot. Li Yunmu's punches hadn't used any divine power, and there wasn't even a hint of any martial art in the way he attacked, so how could Jia Tianquang's accusations hold any value? The only thing that needed explanation was her speed at first, but ancient goddess Lu Qing had probably done something which allowed a holy daughter, who was an expert at controlling sound laws, to catch up to Jia Tianquang. After that happened, he was beaten until he turned foolish. Li Yunmu looked at the wide-eyed Jia Tianquang and grinned. Why am I not a holy daughter of Lakshmi City? Who said that the holy daughters of Lakshmi City can only walk the path sound laws? I will punch your birdhead as much as I want. After saying that, his body trembled, and he turned into a blur that appeared at Jia Tianquang's side. One after another, small holes appeared on Jia Tianquang's body. They came with the sound of bone breaking and blood seeping out. Clang! Li Yunmu returned to his original position while Jia Tianquang fell on the ground, unconscious. The main hall was quiet for a time then. After a long time, De Fan stood up and walked out. The thunder sparks coming from the lightning imprint between his eyebrows were extremely eye-catching. The holy daughter should have already vented her anger. Just a moment ago, Brother Tianquang's words were indeed disrespectful, and we all apologize toward you. There's also ancient goddess Lu Qing to consider. We four urged Brother Tianquang to not request holy daughter H.A.C.K to call for your distinguished self, but Brother Tianquang had always been arrogant and obstinate, so the four of us couldn't do anything, De Fan said with a smile, pushing all the responsibility on the unconscious Jia Tianquang. But at that moment, Jia Tianquang managed to regain consciousness, and when he heard what was being said, he spat out another mouthful of blood. Li Yunmu looked at the four envoys and smiled in amusement. Brunhilde, who was sitting before him, looked at De Fan, who had walked out to handle the matters, and frowned. You say that everything was Jia Tianquang's responsibility and that the four of you were unable to persuade him, so does that mean that he alone is stronger than the four of you? When she asked that question, De Fan was slightly startled and wondered why she was using reason which went against common sense. After a moment of silence, he explained himself. Naturally, that's not the case. The 5 of us chosen by the 5 ancient gods have comparable strength, so apart from innate skills, there isn't much difference between us. If that is the case, how were you all unable to stop him? Doesn't it mean that you just didn't want to stop him? Brunhilde asked casually while looking directly at Difan, who was averting his eyes from her. Difan's expression went stiff, and his smile froze on his face. With Jiutian Kuang quitting, they should have gained an advantage, but they hadn't expected that ancient goddess Lu Qing would be so overbearing. Any intelligent person could see through the matter, but whether they would bring it out in the open was another matter. When ancient goddess Lu Qing directly spoke the truth, wasn't she implying that the four envoys had ulterior motives? Chapter 895, Looking for Trouble. Difan was a profound schemer, and he quickly went through all possibilities while looking at ancient goddess Lu Qing. In the meantime, the imprint between his eyebrows crackled with electricity and some sparks flew out. The other three envoys were expressionless. When the four of them first saw Lu Qing, they were naturally attracted toward her. She was definitely a heaven-shaking beauty, just as their godfathers had said. But appreciation was appreciation. Those who failed to appreciate kindness didn't need to be shown any concern. If the status and strength of an ancient god were put to the side, the four envoys hadn't taken action while Jiutian Kuang, the only one who had acted out, was beaten unconscious. He should have been the perfect scapegoat, but despite him being put in place, the matter of showing disrespect toward an ancient goddess had not ended. Difan hadn't expected that ancient goddess Lu Qing would continue to focus on it without letting go. She was just like someone who asked for another slap on the face after getting a sweet date when hit the first time. It was clearly someone who failed to appreciate kindness. Although we four possess strength similar to that of Jiutian Kuang, his godfather Garuda is the leader among the five ancient gods, so we four also treat Jiutian Kuang as the leader, Difan said in a calm voice, but his expression was no longer cheerful like before. Brunhilde looked at Difan's expression and stayed silent for a while. Then, she said with a smile, treating him as the leader is the same thing. Asking me, an ancient goddess, to come and see you gods of a younger generation, why do you all feel that your position is comparable to mine or even higher? Difan was expressionless and did not say a word. The expressions of the other three envoys who still remained seated were also somewhat gloomy. Speaking in terms of cultivation, they naturally couldn't compare to her. But in terms of status, they weren't very inferior. All of them were first-generation descendants of ancient gods. Ancient goddess Lu Qing sure knows how to jest. We four are very respectful toward your distinguished self, but all of us here are the heirs of ancient gods, so no one could be persuaded by others and would continue to cling to their own dogmatic ways. We were unable to control him, so what is your distinguished self trying to say? Difan, with his figure constantly changing, spoke in a calm voice without giving the slightest fault for the opponent to nitpick upon. When Brunhilde heard his words, she didn't continue speaking, but the expression of holy daughter H.A.C.K standing behind her turned unpleasant. In her eyes, the four envoys might be respectful on the surface, but their words were still filled with sarcasm. Li Yunmu spread his legs and crossed his arms in front of his chest. If he had been in his original form, it wouldn't have been anything inappropriate, but with him looking like Lu Bailing, her chest might be small, but when it was pushed up, it still rose. Difan's expression was gloomy, but when he saw the swelling mountains, his expression changed, and he said with a cough, "Ancient goddess Lu Qing, let this matter pass over, or else everyone will become agitated from all the noise." What a joke! Just because you said to forget, we should forget it? Do you think that this is already your territory? This is Lakshmi city, the domain of ancient goddess Lakshmi. Even if she is still in seclusion, my ancestor is present here. The final say belongs to her. After saying that, Li Yunmu noticed Difan's reaction and immediately put down his hands. The four envoys looked at the holy daughter who was trying her utmost to make things difficult, and their expressions grew dark again. The four of them were the heirs of ancient gods, so even if they hadn't attained ancient god realm, they were still at the peak of the god realm. As long as they joined hands, even an initial stage ancient goddess like Lu Qing might not be able to make them stay. Ancient goddess Lu Qing, does that mean that you still want to find trouble with the four of us? Yet Yen, who was covered in deep blue color from top to bottom, asked with some disdain. We give you a little face and you think that you have the ability. Brunhilde looked at the 4 envoys who had unpleasant expressions and narrowed her eyes. Don't kill them, she finally said languidly. The 4 envoys immediately stood up after hearing her words. Divine energy bubbled forth from their bodies, and the surrounding energy changed erratically. The lighting imprint between the eyebrows of Difan crackled while shining with silvery light. On his side, Pai Zhan transformed again and took the shape of a god with 2 arms. He held a divine blade sparkling in gold in each hand, while his feet were on an enormous lotus flower. He possessed boundless divine energy. Yet Yen moved, and a deep black metal fork appeared in his hand. He held it up high, and the smell of blood spread through the hall. The envoy of Shiva clan who hadn't said anything until then remained calm and collected. Although divine energy hadn't rushed out of his body, his 2 pupils possessing crescent moons were staring at Li Yunmu. Soon, an extravagant sound resounded through the entire hall. The 4 envoys had revealed their full strength and took out their hidden trump cards. After all, Lu Qing was an ancient goddess. If they took her lightly, the ones suffering the calamity would be them. When Holy Daughter Hu-Shi sensed a bright and clear divine presence coming from the 4 envoys, her expression changed. Although she was one of the oldest holy daughters in Lakshmi city and her cultivation had already reached late-stage god level, it was still inferior to that of the 4 ancient gods. She felt her heart hanging in suspense after sensing the presences of the 4 envoys. If she fought with any of them alone, she might not necessarily come out alive. Holy Daughter Hu-Shi leaned over and asked softly, "Lord, do you really intend to fight them?" Brunhilde looked at the 4 envoys who were prepared to fight and said without any concern, "How can we still continue pretending? With me and him here, Lakshmi city won't suffer in the slightest." The envoys came with such grand preparations, so they naturally aren't content with knowing their place. We must make them suffer to teach them a lesson. Your grand battle plan should be very difficult to deal with, right? Li Yunmu wondered aloud. As he said those words, his figure disappeared from the spot, and the 4 envoys looked around seriously. It was just like what had happened with Jiu Tiankuang. But although the 4 of them were paying attention to Li Yunmu, their true focus was on ancient goddess Lu Qing. They believed that Jiu Tiankuang was beaten so badly by a holy daughter only because of Lu Qing helping her secretly. Otherwise, with Jiu Tiankuang's peak god level strength, how could he be beaten without any resistance? Thud, 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 thud. 4 loud sounds echoed, and the 4 envoys, who thought they were completely prepared, were blown away and fell on the ground in all directions. When they crawled back up, they sensed that there was no response from the divine energy in their bodies. Everyone's expressions changed, and they looked at Lu Qing sitting calmly on her wooden chair with dread in their heart. Before they knew it, their cultivation bases were sealed. It wasn't something an initial stage ancient god could do. Difan looked at Brunhilde and said nervously, "Ancient goddess Lu Qing, we came to Lakshmi city so that our godfathers could possess our bodies and participate in the competition. By sealing our cultivation so this little girl could deal with us, aren't you afraid that our godfathers will blame you?" Brunhilde pretended to not have heard him and continued to look at her lily-white hands absent-mindedly. Damned woman! Only resentment remained in Difan's heart. Before he could speak though, a blur flew over, and he felt a powerful force smash into his chest. It blew him away and slammed him into the wall. It was enough for him to lose consciousness. The other 3 envoys huddled together and looked in all directions for escape. Chapter 896, Suspicious Point. Damn that Jiu Tiankuang for provoking this disaster. Damn it, this woman definitely isn't an initial stage ancient god. Furthermore, that girl who walks the path of close quarters combat seems to be very violent. Could it be that this music clan has abandoned the path of sound laws and has started walking the path of close quarters combat? What's the use of saying these things now? It would be better if we thought of a way to not end up like Difan. The three envoys looked at the completely empty hall while on guard against Li Yunmyo coming from anywhere. The three of them felt endless regret in their heart and wondered why they had thought to provoke ancient goddess Lu Qing. From the time they came, the four of them were secretly discussing how Lakshmi city was vulnerable and agreed to the competition for that reason. Otherwise, why would they agree to offering up their ancient god? With the situation like that, the four of them were sure in their hearts that after the alliance, Lakshmi city would turn into a subordinate territory of the five ancient gods. Thus, from the time they came, the five envoys acted unbridled. But what happened afterwards wasn't according to conventional reasoning. They came to find trouble with Lakshmi city, but it backfired on them. A blur came out from the shadow of a pillar and flew directly toward the trio. The next instant, the depression created from the punch appeared on the bodies of the three envoys, and they lost consciousness after spitting out blood. Li Yunmyo returned to his original place. He looked at the five envoys scattered in all directions and said helplessly while shaking his head, "Really boring. Even with such momentum, they couldn't even land one hit. So what should we do now?" Holy daughter H.A.C.K inquired. "Return the five envoys to their houses to rest. They are tired. Continue other things as usual. The five ancient gods won't find trouble with Lakshmi city before the competition ends," Brunhilde said carelessly. When she said that, Li Yunmyo moved and pulled her to take her away. The next moment, only Holy Daughter H.A.C.K remained in the hall. When her eyes came to rest on the five envoys lying on the ground, she felt extremely refreshed in her heart. After some time passed, a couple servants came from outside and left with the five envoys. Holy Daughter H.A.C.K was following behind them. Brunhilde returned to her palace with Li Yunmyo. The moment they reached the front door, Li Yunmyo by her side turned into a shadow and entered through the door. Once Brunhilde also went inside, she saw Li Yunmyo lying on the main seat with a carefree attitude. He glanced at Brunhilde and casually asked, "All settled?" Brunhilde slowly walked next to the main seat and said with a slight smile while leaning on his shoulder, "Asking a question to which you already know the answer. You clearly saw what your shadow clone did." Li Yunmyo didn't reply. Jia Tianquang's words had caused his scalp to go numb. At that time, he was impersonating Lu Bailing, but seeing Jia Tianquang's passionate gaze, he was still affected. His first thought was to pretend that he hadn't seen or heard anything, but he hadn't expected that Brunhilde would see through his plans. This one incident would make him the butt of all jokes for eternity. The next few days the five envoys should remain peaceful. "They will be good until the competition which is in 2 days, Li Yunmyo said to shift the topic. "I will then steal Heavenly Grand Ritual and return to Azura City to start the Battle of Gods. At that time, you need to look after Lakshmi City and also the ground clan that I created. When the time comes, allow them to migrate to Lakshmi City. After all, Lakshmi City's environment is pretty good, and it would make it more convenient for you to look after them." Brunhilde nodded and then asked, "Once the Battle of Gods starts, what do you intend to do?" Li Yunmyo wasn't an idler. He stayed in Lanlu to start the Battle of Gods because he had a particular aim. When he came to Lanlu, he had rescued a group of mortals and imparted martial skills to them. His attempt to start the Battle of Gods in advance was also related to his aim. It was just that Li Yunmyo had never told Brunhilde the reason. Do what something like power of belief cannot be allowed to exist in this world. All the infected gods need to be eliminated. If they aren't removed, the world won't change. You don't need to worry though. Even if you are also a god, you haven't relied on the power of belief to advance," Li Yunmyo said and turned around to embrace Brunhilde. "Naturally, I'm not worried. However, the gods of Lanlu have all used the power of belief. Don't you find it strange? True God created this world and is the father of all living creatures, but even if he disappeared, the gods of other areas didn't dare to use it," Brunhilde said slowly. She then looked at Li Yunmyo with her forehead creased. When Li Yunmyo didn't reply, she sighed and continued to speak. "Unless you have someone backing you, you won't be able to do so. Although true God created the world, he didn't control everything happening in the world. All the matters were left to master gods to oversee. The master gods of other regions followed the command and didn't touch the power of belief, but the master god of Lanlu still continued to use it before he disappeared. Yes, only Lanlu among the 5 regions of the origin world used power of belief. The other 4 regions hadn't even thought of touching it. When the power of belief was just discovered, the gods of the 5 regions occupied their territories and developed their influence over the mortals to ensure a steady flow of power of belief. Later, they began to occupy the territories of other gods to obtain even more power of belief. At that time, the first war of gods began. It attracted the attention of the true God, who moved to stop it and passed down the command prohibiting the use of power of belief. Afterwards, when the true God disappeared, the master gods were sealed. If Lanlu used that opportunity of no one being present to disregard the prohibition and still continue to rely on power of belief, that could not be justified. The ancient gods of the other 4 regions waited for the master god's return. If the master gods returned to see the ancient gods still using power of belief, they would try to suppress it for sure, but the 7 ancient gods of Lanlu weren't afraid in the slightest. The backing which Brunhilde spoke of. You say that before the master god of Lanlu was sealed, he still continued relying on power of belief. Li Yunmu asked with suspicion and a frown on his face. Brunhilde nodded, then said, I am not exactly sure what happened between True God and the 5 master gods, which resulted in them being sealed and disappearing, but what I know is that after the battle of gods ended and the True God passed down his command, the master god of Lanlu still kept on using the power of belief. The 7 ancient gods underneath him were also the same. Moreover, True God knew it, but didn't stop them. Multitudes of thoughts ran through Li Yunmu's mind. The true God knew but didn't stop them? Why exactly was that? The true God had disappeared and become a system. But when Li Yunmu asked about what had happened in those days, the system didn't agree to entrust the matter to him and instead kept saying that there was a potential enemy waiting for him. When he learned about the hidden enemy, he thought that it could only be a power from outside the origin world, but when he heard Brunhilde's words, he wondered whether this enemy was hidden among them or if perhaps it was the master god of Lanlu. Chapter 897, Ancient Gods Descend. Are you still not ready to talk about the matter of that year? Li Yunmu inquired in his brain. But there was deathly stillness in his mind. The system was clearly pretending to not have heard him. But why exactly was it not saying anything even now? Li Yunmu thought about it but couldn't understand it. He didn't continue asking, however. If the system wanted to speak, then it would do so, without waiting for him to ask about it. But the system wasn't speaking and Brunhilde's words caused a sense of crisis to rise in Li Yunmu's heart. Among the 7 ancient gods of Lanlu, apart from ancient goddess Lakshmi, all the other 6 ancient gods use power of belief. If you kill those 6 ancient gods, then once the master gods returns, he will naturally settle debts with you. Perhaps you don't place ancient gods in your eyes, but you don't have the least bit of assurance against winning against master gods, Brunhilde said without any hesitation, but with a frown on her face. My present strength is only at quasi-master god level. But with demonic transformation, I might not completely lose against a master god. Li Yunmu took hold of Brunhilde's lily-white hands to console her. When she heard him, she shook her head. You don't understand. Although the difference between quasi-master gods and master gods is only one step, an unsurpassable ravine exists between them. In the eyes of a master god, there's no difference between quasi-master gods and ancient gods. Both of them can be pinched to death. Li Yunmu had never thought that the difference between master gods and quasi-master gods would be so huge. But even if a master god returned and saw that someone had killed 6 of their ancient gods, they shouldn't find the person to take their revenge. After all, the one who removed the 5 seals would be Li Yunmu. They should all thank him for removing their shackles. What was more, even if the master god wanted revenge, given the presence of the true god, their strength wouldn't be enough to achieve that. Don't worry. Even if the 6 ancient gods have backing, I also have it. Alright, let's not discuss these eyesores. There are more important matters waiting for our attention. What matters? Before Brunhilde could finish, she realized what matter Li Yunmei was talking about. She rolled her eyes and took the initiative to snuggle with Li Yunmei. Since she learned that Li Yunmei had an illegitimate daughter outside, she thought of having their own child. For this reason, it was better if they tried for it any time there was a moment when no one would disturb them. Time continued to pass. For gods, 2 days went by in a wink. During that time, Li Yunmei and Brunhilde stayed inside the palace, trying their utmost to sow a seed. Ever since Li Yunmei came, Lu Bailing intentionally avoided Brunhilde and suppressed the thoughts in her heart by keeping herself busy with the holy daughters of the music clan. When Lu Bailing saw the 5 envoys for the first time, she was quite intimidated. They were said to be very arrogant, but they took a few steps back after meeting her and shut themselves in their rooms on the grounds of being out of sorts. Among the holy daughters, who she happened to be by Lu Bailing's side then and told her about Li Yunmei impersonating her and beating the 5 envoys violently. When Lu Bailing heard that, her fair face turned bright red, and she said in an extremely soft voice, "Destroying my reputation like that, who will marry me now?" Once the 2 days passed, everyone in the music clan began to prepare the mansion and built a stage in the center of the lotus pond. They also set up spectator stands all around it. One after another, music clan's descendants rushed to take their seats nervously. The competition right then was related to Lakshmi city's new ancient goddess. If she lost, Lakshmi city's position would be greatly reduced and it would turn into a subordinate to the 5 ancient gods. The 11 holy daughters appeared suddenly with Brunhilde and sat down on the competition platform. Before long, the 5 envoys also arrived on the competition stage. After being beaten viciously, the 5 envoys respectfully nodded toward Brunhilde and said, "Ancient goddess Lu Qing is early. Naturally I wanted to come a little bit earlier. It would be better to cut off the plans of your godfathers prematurely," Brunhilde said while holding a cup of tea. Jiu Tian Kuang sneered then sat down in front of the holy daughters. Although the 2 sides weren't at war, the mood on stage was extremely serious. The next instant, multicolored light blossomed in the sky. 5 rays of light suddenly appeared and dropped on the bodies of the 5 envoys. After the lights disappeared, the 5 envoys opened their eyes one by one and erupted with divine presence. "Lu Qing, you came early. We 5 were a little slow. Ha ha ha, we haven't seen each other for only a brief few days, but I already feel that 3 autumns have passed." The faces of the 5 envoys were filled with smiles while speaking with Brunhilde. She forced a smile on her face and softly said, "Since you've come, then let's begin. Who among you will come first?" It was the day of the competition, so all the descendants of the music clan were gathered at the lotus pond. The entire residence was completely empty. When Li Yunmei walked out from the palace, he glanced in the direction of the lotus pond and sensed the eruption of the divine presences. Phew, releasing divine presence just after descending. "I wonder how will you be able to smile after losing heavenly grand ritual," Li Yunmei mumbled. "You want to steal heavenly grand ritual?" A sharp and clear feminine voice echoed from behind, and Li Yunmei turned around to see Lu Bailing looking at him with a strange expression. Li Yunmei looked at Lu Bailing's blank expression and said with a smile, "Why did you come here? Being a holy daughter, don't you need to be present on the stage?" Lu Bailing saw his passionate gaze, and her face turned slightly red. She lowered her head and said, "What will I do there? I am only someone who recently became a holy daughter, so my strength still hasn't reached the god realm. If I go, I will only lose face for Lakshmi city." Li Yunmei nodded and asked, "Then why did you come here?" "To find me." When he said that, Lu Bailing's face turned even redder, and she lowered her head more. She had appeared in the vicinity of Brunhilde's palace to find Li Yunmei. After learning from Holy Daughter Hu Sh that her reputation was gone, she naturally wanted to borrow this opportunity to ask Li Yunmu about what exactly was he thinking. But when she reached the palace, she had second thoughts about her decision. After all, she was a holy daughter of Lakshmi city. If she directly spoke such words, she would probably be laughed at by others. After thinking for a long while, she still decided to walk on ahead to find Li Yunmu to clarify. Lu Bailing thought about the words stuck in her throat and forcefully swallowed them. I came to find you to ask about Pipa clan's children. Are they doing all right? Li Yunmu looked at Lu Bailing, who had lowered her head, and said with satisfaction, they are safe. Azura wouldn't attack weaklings. You can be calm. Wait until I steal the heavenly grand ritual, then the 5 ancient gods and Azura are bound to fight. When that happens, I will rescue those children. Lu Bailing nodded and softly said, be careful. Chapter 898, The Black-Robed Person. Lu Bailing stood at the door, watching as Li Yunmu went into the distance and gradually turned into a black dot. After staying for a moment more, she walked toward the lotus pond with a smile on her face. Li Yunmu went to a place outside Music Clan's residence where others were present, then turned into a blur that flew into the sky. From up there, all of Music Clan's residence was fully visible, and he could even hear the wild laughter of the 5 envoys. Laugh as much as you can now, for I will certainly make you weep afterwards. After passing through the clouds, Li Yunmu saw an enormous palace. It was built of 5-colored ceramic and clearly reflected the background, which made it extremely eye-catching. There was also a wave of ripples which enveloped the entire divine palace. Li Yunmu stretched his hand and touched it. When his fingers touched the ripples, the surface erupted with sparks. It wasn't that the defensive spell formation could not be destroyed, but if Li Yunmu was determined to enter, he just needed to endure the explosive thunder. The power of the divine thunder wasn't very formidable to Li Yunmu, at most, it only had the strength of late-stage god. After all, the defensive system was only used as a warning. If someone forcefully charged in, the 5 ancient gods would immediately know. It would give them enough time to pull their souls out of the Music Clan and back into their bodies. You can come out now. I will leave this defensive spell formation to you, Li Yunmu mentally told the system. Its presence appeared right away, and the system directly threw out a ring-sized halo. This restriction-destroying halo isn't free. Li Yunmu looked at the ring-sized prohibition-destroying halo in his hand with a dumbfounded expression. After a long time, he took a deep breath, then threw the restriction-destroying halo into the circulating ripples. Once the halo came in contact with the ripple shield, it took root in it and directly embedded itself in its surface. The next moment, it formed a gateway large enough to allow a human to pass through. Li Yunmu stepped into it and entered the divine palace. The restriction-breaking halo shrunk and flew into his hand. After taking a glance at it, Li Yunmu placed it on his finger. Such a good thing could be used again. After entering the divine palace, he could see many guards outside and people going in and out of the corridors. Some of them were wearing streamers, while others were carrying wine and spirit fruits. Strange, this divine palace is the former residence of the 7 ancient gods, but even their heirs had to stay in the cities below. Now the divine palace only has 5 ancient gods who are in seclusion, so who are these beautiful maids carrying the spirit fruit and wine? Li Yunmu asked with suspicion while frowning. The system appeared in his mind and anxiously said, follow after these servants to see. Follow them? Li Yunmu concealed his figure and fused with the surroundings. With a single step, he appeared behind the last palace maid. A light breeze blew forth, and the last palace maid trembled. She turned around with suspicion, but didn't see a soul in sight. She then mumbled to herself and followed after the group. While following her, Li Yunmu mentally communicated with the system. What did you discover? I have never seen you so anxious. The system didn't reply, and Li Yunmu pulled back his consciousness after sensing 5 formidable divine presences concealed in the depths of the palace. That direction should have been the region where the 5 ancient gods were in seclusion. But the palace maids were moving in a direction away from where the 5 ancient gods were in seclusion. They went to the farthest eastern area of the divine palace. In there, some mysterious presence was residing. It was extremely faint, which was different from the grand divine presences of the 5 ancient gods. From time to time, it would emit out the power of Allah. The palace maids arrived in front of a black palace at the edge of the eastern area, then stopped and began to wait. Standing behind them, Li Yunmi raised his head and looked at the palace. Thick black fog floated out of the black wall. Li Yunmi reached out with his hand, and the black god leaped like a snake into his fingertips. The entire fingernail was painted black as if it was painted, but the next instant, the black fog which had invaded his body was instantly ejected and scattered in the air. Yin energy. How did someone possessing demonic energy appear in the divine palace? The yin energy could be classified as negative and demonic, but it was somewhat inferior to the demonic energy contained in Li Yunmu's body. However, the crucial point was that none of the 7 ancient gods of Lanla practiced the laws of death. Without practicing the laws of death, the yin energy couldn't be controlled. And if the ancient gods didn't practice the laws of death, it was even more impossible for their god descendants to possess the laws of death. All the descendant gods walked the path of refining bloodline ability, so they naturally inherited some of the laws from their ancient god ancestors. Could it be that it was not a god from Lanlu? Li Yunmu frowned slightly while thinking about it. At that moment, the doors of the palace opened, and a person wearing black clothes walked out. He looked at the rows of palace maids and issued a horrifying laughter, then began to speak. The ancient gods are indeed considerate, arranging such beautiful maids for me. The palace maids carrying the wine and fruits lowered their heads while trembling. They did not dare to say anything. Li Yunmu looked at the presence coming from the black man and found it completely strange, as if it didn't belong to the origin world. As expected, it's them. When the system's voice echoed in Li Yunmu's mind, he became even more convinced that his guess was correct and followed the maids inside. Once he entered the palace, he encountered a wave of threatening chill wind. The maid standing at the front trembled from head to toe. Her mortal body was unable to endure the yin energy. It entered her body, and frost condensed between her eyebrows. While standing before her, the black-robed man glanced around and said with a smile, "Ha ha ha, I am very fond of looking at the vulnerable appearances of you, beauties." After saying that, the black-robed man turned around toward the black fog in the front and respectfully said, "Young master, ancient gods contributed some young girls." The black fog scattered, revealing the seat of the main god. A young man with naked upper body and 2 red eyes was looking at the palace maids with excitement. The ancient gods are still considerate. I have broken all the young girls in the past few days. What sort of person is the young master? You're the only son of Yin Emperor. Even the master god of this part of the real world would have to be respectful toward you. In order to move forward, the 5 ancient gods must serve the young master properly, the black-robed man said. That young master languidly lying on the main seat had a faint smile. Naturally, there will be rewards for serving me properly. If the 5 ancient gods are tactful, I can request 2 positions for them from Father. I heard the 5 ancient gods want to offer a peak beauty to me, what about that? The black-robed man nodded. The 5 ancient gods said that they will bring her today. If that woman really is a heaven-shaking beauty like they said, I will bestow the position of Master God upon the 5 ancient gods. The feminine young master waved his hand, and a powerful energy grabbed the young woman standing in the front. The girl struggled while drifting toward the young master with tightly closed lips, but at a speed visible to the naked eye, she turned into a mummy. Congealed vitality entered the mouth of the young master. The next instant, the entire palace's yin energy materialized somewhat and became even thicker. Chapter 899, People from Beyond the Heavens. Yin Emperor's son lay languidly on the main seat while looking at the shivering women underneath. He revealed a satisfactory expression and said with a smile, "Only the real world is good. If you want mortals, you don't need arbitration from alliance. Young master means that you can do whatever you please in the real world. If the young master wants mortal women, the 5 ancient gods would prepare them for him. With endless vitality, young master can advance another step and rank in the upper layer among the 10 sons of heaven, the black-robed man said with excitement in his voice. It seemed that if the young master's position rose, then he would also receive some rewards for having followed him. Alliance? 10 sons of heavens? Li Yunmu listened to the words of the young master and the black-robed man. They ascertained that the two of them weren't part of the real world. They belonged to a power which came from beyond the heavens. Just a moment ago, the system who was an incarnation of the true God also recognized their presence. The two of them were the hidden enemies which true God had mentioned before. The 5 ancient gods surprisingly colluded with the people from beyond the heavens. They tried to curry favor with them, so could the powers of beyond the heavens be more formidable compared to those of the real world? This person is the son of Yin Emperor. What you are thinking is right. These two belong to powers from beyond the heavens, the system explained without any emotion in its voice. Emperor Yin? Is he very formidable? Li Yunmu asked with suspicion. Is he a master god? The cultivation system of the powers from beyond the heavens is different from ours, so the classification is also different. But in terms of the origin world's cultivation system, Yin Emperor stands at the peak of master god realm, possessing quasi-true god strength. Hiss! Li Yunmu took in a sharp breath. He hadn't expected that the Yin Emperor's strength would be so formidable that he'd be a quasi-true god. No wonder then that the young master spoke of bestowing the position of the master gods to the 5 ancient gods in such a carefree tone. Experts like Yin Emperor, how many of them are there among the powers from beyond the heavens? There shouldn't be many, right? Li Yunmu frowned, then looked at the Yin Emperor's son. Not many. When the origin world and the powers from beyond the heavens were in battle, there were a dozen experts around the level of Yin Emperor. Afterwards, I sealed the origin world using true God's cultivation. Some years have passed since then, so I don't know the exact strength of the powers from beyond the heavens, the system said indifferently. I hadn't expected that the 5 ancient gods would surprisingly collude with the powers from beyond the heavens. What a damn mess! But perhaps, Azura also has a party from powers from beyond the heavens supporting him. Li Yunmu did not say anything and just looked with a gloomy expression at the young master lying on the main seat. Just how enormous was this power from beyond the heavens? It was no wonder that they were being unbridled in the origin world. But the most terrifying thing was that the 5 ancient gods were colluding with the powers from beyond the heavens and wanted to offer Brunhilde as sacrifice. They were truly wretched. Li Yunmu had come to steal the heavenly grand ritual, but unexpectedly discovered 2 people from beyond the heavens. Now that he S.A.E. them, however, he naturally could not let them continue living. Can you conceal my presence from the next spell formation arranged outside the divine palace? Li Yunmu inquired in this mind. Although the 5 ancient gods have colluded with a person from beyond the heavens, they are also on guard against each other. They have established a spell formation outside the divine palace, isolating other presences from being released, but I can secretly modify it, the system said in a gloomy tone. It extremely loathed the people from beyond the heavens. After a moment, it continued. All right, the control of the spell formation is in your hands. Try your best to kill the 2 of them. The young master sitting on the main seat looked at the shivering palace maids and revealed a smile. From the time he entered the origin world, the 5 ancient gods had dispatched groups of young maids repeatedly, which allowed him to become increasingly more proficient in control over the laws of death. His cultivation speed was increasing by leaps and bounds. In the alliance, if he dared to wantonly grab mortal women, he would be punished. Even if his father was an almighty, he would still be unable to protect him. But the situation was different right then. After coming to the only real world and colluding with the 5 ancient gods, he could increase his cultivation speed by using women and also partition the origin world's territory in advance. After his father completed the final step, he would rise to emperor from being the son of heaven. Who is it? Just when the son of heaven was dreaming about his beautiful future, he sensed an unfamiliar energy in the divine palace. Instantly, he snapped back to attention and looked at the group of women. One look was enough for him to see the black-robed man being subdued by a young man. He was unable to even take a single step. Who are you? Daring to come to the one true world and harming its living beings, Li Yunmu said coldly. This seat is the Yin Son of Heaven, a guest from beyond the heavens. A trifling god like you, are you a subordinate of the 5 ancient gods? Daring to attack this seat's subordinate, you really have large guts. When the Yin Son of Heaven saw Li Yunmu releasing a divine presence, it confirmed that he was only a god. In his world, he would have only become an immortal. So it was the Yin Son of Heavens from beyond the heavens. But being a person from beyond the heavens, you dared to come to the real world and harm its life. You really treat it as your own house. Li Yunmu said. You are only a subordinate god of the 5 ancient gods, so how can you dare to talk to me like that? The origin world was supposed to lose and fall under our control that year. If it wasn't for your true God who used his divine body to seal off the origin world, you all would have become our servants a long time ago, the Yin Son of Heaven indifferently said while looking coldly at him. Li Yunmu smiled and exerted some of his strength through the hand grabbing the black-robed person's neck. A part of demonic energy drilled into the black-robed man's body and shattered his soul. Li Yunmu then relaxed his hand, and the black-robed man turned into ashes that fell to the ground. You aren't a subordinate of the 5 gods, the Yin Son of Heaven said in astonishment. He stood up and pressed toward the ground. The black fog from the entire main palace rushed forth, filling up the entire space. Li Yunmu's expression tightened. The Yin Son of Heaven was the son of Yin Emperor, who possessed the cultivation of a quasi-true god. That meant that Yin Son of Heaven would at least possess the strength of an ancient god. However, the cultivation of a person from beyond the heavens was different from that of a god, so Li Yunmu naturally had to be a little careful. If he was inattentive and allowed the Yin Son of Heaven to run away, it wouldn't be good. His divine power rushed forth, and one after another threads of demonic energy spread out from his body. He looked at the black fog filling up the entire palace hall, then the black fog rolled and retreated in 2 directions. The entire area began to change. The originally black palace hall became much more sinister, with countless will-o-wisps floating down from the top. The Yin Son of Heaven changed into golden clothes, and 2 rows of black-robed men lined up before him. Li Yunmu looked at the Yin Son of Heaven clad in emperor clothes, and a hint of curiosity appeared in his eyes. Just a moment ago, although the presence of the Yin Son of Heavens was strange, it was very weak, probably at the same level as that of a god of the origin world. But once he entered the land of illusion, the Yin Son of Heavens was clad in emperor's clothes and his presence became comparable to that of an ancient god. There was a faintly discernible relation between his increased strength and the illusion land. A bumpkin of the origin world, I will expand your horizons today, the Yin Son of Heavens said with a sinister smile and disdain in his eyes. Li Yunmu wasn't angry and said with a smile, I naturally know that this is a domain. But even if you strengthen it, I wonder if you can take my punch. When he said that, the Yin Son of Heaven sitting on the high seat suddenly burst out laughing. Chapter 900, Questions and Answers. The man's laughter was full of disdain, and it resounded through the entire palace hall. After a long time, the Yin Son of Heaven stopped and said while looking at Li Yunmu, You are a trivial god of the origin world, but you speak very brazenly. In the origin world, only those who had risen to ancient god realm can comprehend a domain. As for us, we can comprehend the domain after becoming immortal. When we shed off mortality and become true immortals, it is comparable to you people becoming gods. Li Yunmu nodded, then said, You people from beyond the heavens are indeed ferocious. Those in God realm being able to comprehend domain is something that our origin world cannot compare to. The gods of the origin world are restricted and can only break through using the power of belief. When the Yin Son of Heaven heard the words power of belief, disdain appeared in the eyes, and he smiled coldly. The power of belief is a shortcut. It spoils the future and nothing more. You probably don't know, but the power of belief was brought to the origin world with the thought of causing internal strife among you all. But I hadn't expected that not only would it cause internal strife, but it would also lead to a rebellion. When people from the origin world tried to become true gods, they surprisingly took the initiative to collude with those from beyond the heavens. Back then, if this hadn't happened, the origin world wouldn't have turned into a subordinate of beyond the heavens. Anyone who wanted to become a true god had to first possess the strength of a master god. The ancient gods were suppressed in advance, if their wish to rise was discovered. But master gods were already at the top, so when they wanted to obtain the strength of a true god, they collaborated with people from beyond the heavens. After all, Brunhilde had said that the master god of Lanlu was still using power of belief before he was sealed. Now, Azura and the other 5 ancient gods were colluding with the people from beyond the heavens, so didn't it mean that the god who previously betrayed the origin world was the master god of Lanlu? If he used power of belief at that time, he might have obtained the strength of a quasi-true god. But when the master god and the people from beyond the heavens colluded, how did the true god stop them? It was by sealing the entire origin world. Could it then be that the other master gods had also betrayed the origin world? So this was the case. No wonder then that the true god wanted to ban the use of power of belief in the origin world, saying that it was a malignant tumor which shouldn't be touched. It was the people from beyond the heavens playing a trick on him. But with a master god and you all colluding at that time, why couldn't you capture the origin world? Li Yunmu asked with curiosity. He was like a school child right then who wanted to learn the secrets of the years past from the mouth of Yin Son of Heaven. The man looked at Li Yunmu and said, "Your status is very low. You're only a god, so you don't know about the matters of that time nor the strength of the true god. Even when confronting a similar true god, his chances of victory would still be higher in his home ground. Even if the master gods betrayed him and the emperor monarchs from beyond the heavens came to attack the origin world, the true god could still stop their advance and drive away the emperor monarchs. Moreover, the origin world was sealed by the true god, so those from beyond the heavens couldn't enter." Li Yunmu nodded after hearing it and courteously said, "Many thanks to you for telling me the secrets of those years. I still have one final question though. Since the origin world is sealed, how did you people from beyond the heavens enter now? It's naturally because the seal has weakened. The true god used his body as the core of the spell formation, and the 5 master gods as the spell points to seal the origin world. The factions of the emperor monarchs have been standing guard outside the origin world for the moment the seal weakens, and when it did, they immediately reported it," Yin Son of Heaven explained while looking at Li Yunmu as a dead man. He was just a god and nothing more. He was no different from an ant. Even if Li Yunmu was someone who dressed as a pig to eat the tiger, he could at best be an ancient god of the origin world. The Yin Son of Heaven could reach the strength of the origin world's ancient gods by relying on his domain, which was sufficient to contend against the unknown god. Even if Li Yunmu was a peak-level ancient god, Yin Son of Heavens wouldn't be afraid of him. After all, his emperor father had bestowed him with his imprint before the journey to the origin world. With the imprint of a quasi-true god, he could insta-kill an ancient god. That was the reason why he was willing to explain so many things to a stranger. Li Yunmu nodded, feeling enlightened. With the information obtained from the Yin Son of Heaven, he was able to guess almost everything that had happened in the past. At that time, beyond the heavens released power of belief in the origin world, attracting the attention of the gods, who began fighting among themselves over it. One of the master gods even colluded with beyond the heavens to overthrow the true god. Afterwards, when true god sensed this, he banished the emperor monarchs from beyond the heavens and sealed the 5 master gods as the spell points before sacrificing his divine body to close the origin world. However, when Li Yunmu opened one of the seals, the seal on the origin world weakened, and the powers from beyond the heavens used the opportunity to enter the origin world. It meant that Li Yunmu was the culprit. If he hadn't removed the seal, the powers from beyond the heavens wouldn't have been able to enter the origin world and join hands with the ancient gods of Lanlu. Why didn't you tell me these things when I was removing the seal? Li Yunmu asked the system in his mind. The system sighed and helplessly said, even if I hadn't told you about it, so what? Even if the seal wasn't removed, beyond the heavens has a sage who is equivalent to a true god, so they would have undid the seal sooner or later. At that time, the origin world would have been forced to become a subordinate of beyond the heavens. Li Yunmu didn't reply. The facts also confirmed the system's word. The seal of the origin world was only a temporary solution, it would be opened from the outside sooner or later. Who knew how many of the 5 sealed master gods had relied on beyond the heavens? With how strong this enemy was, the origin world was in grave danger. Do you still have anything else you want to ask? Apart from the cultivation of beyond the heavens, I can explain everything to you. If you don't have, you can go and die, Yin Son of Heaven said with a carefree smile. Nothing, many thanks for explaining these things to me, Li Yunmu said with sincerity, then slowly advanced toward Yin Son of Heaven. His figure flashed, and he appeared in front of Yin Son of Heaven with a punch. When the Yin Son of Heaven saw Li Yunmu being so brazen, he unhurriedly picked up a writing brush moistened in ink that lay on the table and sketched one character in the air. That character erupted with the laws of death and collided against Li Yunmu's punch. The punch exploded, and the letter scattered. The punch then erupted with demonic energy that rushed to attack Yin Son of Heavens while emitting the presence of a quasi-master god. You are surprisingly a quasi-master god. The Yin Son of Heaven sensed the divine might, and his expression grew taut. His figure transformed into black fog and retreated continuously. He wanted to pass through the wall to escape. When the black fog touched the wall, it shot back like a bullet and fell to the ground, transforming back into Yin Son of Heaven. He looked at Li Yunmu with a gloomy expression and gnashed his teeth. You changed my spell formation. Despicable. A quasi-master god coming to deal with him, who had just become an immortal, was certainly strong bullying the weak. With such a disparity in strength, secretly modifying the spell formation outside the palace was even more despicable. But when Li Yunmu heard Yin Son of Heaven's words, he couldn't help but burst out laughing. You are a person from beyond the heavens, while I am a god of the origin world, he said once he calmed down. If I get to kill you, then regardless of any methods I use, they can't be considered as despicable or lowly. Between you and me, only one can survive.